A normal residential street in North London's Enfield area, Green Street. Single mother Peggy Hodgson lived there, along with her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. Life was tough, but it was going normally. At least, that's what it seemed like at first. Suddenly, one night, strange occurrences began in their small house. Furniture moved on its own. Knocking sounds echoed from the walls, and doors and windows opened suddenly. But the most terrifying thing was what began to happen to 11-year-old Janet. She claimed someone was living inside her, an existence that was not of this world. Everyone, from neighbors to local police, witnessed something unusual. Even the British newspaper Daily Mirror printed some terrifying photos taken from outside their house, which shook the entire country. This is known as the Enfield Poltergeist, one of the most talked about paranormal cases in British history, and the 2016 horror film The Conjuring 2 was made based on this very true event. And with that, let's start today's story. Before getting into the real story of The Conjuring 2, let's briefly share a real-life incident. A case touched by Lorraine and Ed Warren, though they failed to resolve it. This is the case the couple was later forced to abandon, and its name is the Amityville Horror. Back then, people were terrified just hearing the name of this house. Let's find out about this unresolved case. The year was 1927. Amityville, a small town on Long Island, about 30 miles from New York City. A large house was built there, 112 Ocean Avenue. It is rumored that the house was built on what was once the burial ground of the Shinnecock Native Americans. Gossip suggests the former owner of the house, Ketchum, was involved in satanic rituals or witchcraft. These rumors turned into a chilling reality on November 13, 1974. 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. brutally shot and killed his parents and 4 siblings, aged 9 to 18, inside the house. He later pleaded guilty in court and received a life sentence in December 1975. However, the most prevalent rumor was that Ronald DeFeo confessed that someone constantly whispered in his ear, telling him to murder his family. 3 months after the murders, the house was sold for only $80,000 to the couple George and Kathleen Lutz. Upon moving into the house, they called Father Ralph Zapokera for a cleansing. George later reported that during the house cleansing, the father heard an invisible voice say, "Get out." That voice also warned him to stay away from the second-floor bedroom where the DeFeo parents had died. But the cleansing did not bring peace to the house. Instead, it ushered in a disaster. Strange things began to happen in the house. Doors would close on their own, furniture would float, and sometimes family members would even float in the air. An invisible force repeatedly bound George to his bed. He would often wake up at 3:15 a.m., close to the time of the DeFeo murders. Furthermore, a strange smell often pervaded the house. The most terrifying thing was that George's wife, Kathleen, suddenly noticed her face changing, looking like an elderly woman, and she would float in the air under the influence of a dark presence. Exactly 28 days later, the Lutz family abandoned everything and fled the house. The Conjuring 2 hints at 2 true events. One is the Amityville Horror case. The second is the Enfield Poltergeist case, which caused widespread controversy across the world. And the movie The Conjuring 2 is based on this true story centered around the incident that took place in Enfield, London. This case is one of the most terrifying events in the lives of Ed and Lorraine Warren. So now, let's begin the story of The Conjuring 2. At the request of the church, Ed and Lorraine Warren come to inspect the haunted house on Ocean Avenue in Amityville. According to the Lutz family, an evil presence exists in this house. The cameraman fits cameras and sound setups in every part of the house. After all the work is done, Lorraine sits down with them for a meeting. She asks everyone to close their eyes and uses her inner spiritual power, which they call spiritual body manifestation. If you've seen the previous videos, you know that Sister Irene, her mother, and Lorraine are descendants of Saint Lucy. That's why they've had spiritual power since birth. For example, they could see figures from the other world. As soon as she closes her eyes, Lorraine enters another world. It is quite dark all around. she hears some whispering sounds inside the house. Lorraine is witnessing this entire event from Ronald DeFeo's perspective. An unknown voice is heard in his ear. Someone is telling him to kill everyone, and thus he shoots and kills everyone one by one, from his parents to his siblings. Lorraine has no control over herself in that world. However, in the final scene, she regains control of her body and witnesses the event. Her body seems to tremble. She senses the presence of a small child there and follows him. Ed asks her to come out of the spiritual body manifestation, but she doesn't listen and follows the child until she reaches the basement. A little later, she sees the 4 siblings who were killed in this house. They nod their heads and point towards the mirror. As soon as she pulls back the curtain on the mirror, she senses the presence of a nun behind her. She turns around only to see no one. Looking in the mirror, Valak grabs her by the throat, but after a few moments, it disappears. However, she sees Ed standing in front of her and lets out a scream. Lorraine also screams, awakened from this nightmare. Crying, she hugs Ed. When Ed asks her about it, Lorraine says, "I have seen a demonic entity from hell, which I have never seen before." Due to Lorraine's mental distress, they did not work on this case later. As a result, they faced a lot of criticism. They were even called to talk shows and humiliated, being told they were spreading superstition in society and that his wife's spiritual practice was completely a drama. They were called frauds. Ed got angry on the talk show and got into some trouble with the host. But Lorraine calms him down and says she wants to stay away from all this for now. Then the story moves to the Hodgson family living in London, where single mother Peggy lives with her 4 children, Janet, Margaret, John, and Billy. During school time, Janet is sitting and talking with her friend. Her friend hands her a cigarette and gives her a Ouija board from her bag. When the principal sees this incident, she scolds Janet and her friend. After school, the siblings return home. Peggy is on the phone with a lawyer because the children's father hasn't sent money for 3 months. The electricity bill is also overdue due to lack of money. In the meantime, Janet arrives, and Peggy starts scolding her because the principal called Peggy and told her about her daughter's antics. However, Janet tells her she didn't smoke. Johnny, standing nearby, instigates his mother, saying, "Mom, she's lying. The whole school knows she smokes with Camila." In the middle of all this, Billy says, "Mom, I'm hungry. Get me some biscuits." Peggy is constantly struggling to raise her children amidst all the arguments and lack of money. Still, they manage to live happily in some way. That night, Margaret notices Janet sitting with the Ouija board. She is not familiar with the Ouija board. Janet tells her that they can contact dead spirits through the Ouija board. "Camila and I talked so much at school." Margaret finds the subject interesting, so she also sits with her with the Ouija board. They try to call a spirit, but nothing happens. Considering it mere childishness, Margaret leaves. Janet also doesn't think much of it and keeps the Ouija board under the bed. It is about 1:05 a.m. that night. Everyone is fast asleep. Janet suddenly wakes up and notices she is not on her own bed but on the sofa downstairs. This surprises her greatly for the first time. When Margaret was sleeping, she heard a knock on the door. Upon opening the gate, she first sees no one. But a little later, she notices Janet outside. The question is, if Janet went outside, why was the door locked from the inside? The next night, Janet and Billy were playing with a crooked toy. Peggy scolds the children and puts them to sleep, then goes to sleep herself. In the middle of the night, Billy suddenly feels thirsty for water and goes to the kitchen. But looking out the window, he notices there is no wind outside, but the swing in the home playground is swinging by itself in the fog. Meanwhile, in the room, Janet is talking to someone in her sleep. Margaret hears Janet saying, "Get out of our room and leave Billy alone." Then, in a deep voice, Janet herself says, "You will all die. Tell your mother and Billy will also die." Margaret tries to calm Janet down, crying, and puts her back to sleep. But a little later, she gets out of bed and screams, "Stay away from Billy. Leave us alone." As Margaret tries to calm Janet, an elderly man's voice comes from a dark corner of the room. He says, "This is my house. Get out of here, all of you." Margaret, quite scared this time, immediately turns on the light, but no one is seen in the room. As Billy was going upstairs after drinking water, he saw an old man sitting on the sofa in a corner of the dark living room. Upon reaching the top, he trips over the toy. He throws it into the playing tent and goes to sleep. A little later, that toy comes back to the room on its own. When it reaches the front of the tent, a man lets out a loud scream. Billy runs to his mother in fear and says, "Mom, there is someone inside the tent." Peggy checks but sees nothing, so she understands that Billy might have had a nightmare. But suddenly, she hears a sound from downstairs. Going there, she finds Janet sitting on the sofa. When she wakes up, she says, "I don't know what happened to me. I might have walked in my sleep." Her entire body hurts. Peggy touches her body and notices she is burning with fever. The next day, no one is home. Janet is completely alone. It's raining outside. She is happily watching TV in the living room. She notices the TV channels are changing on their own. She picks up the remote and puts on her favorite channel again. But after a while, the channel keeps changing again. When she goes to pick up the remote lying next to her, she sees that the remote she had just kept there is no longer there. Then Peggy calls, and after talking to her, Janet hangs up and notices the remote is on the sofa. This makes her think a lot. She takes the remote again and keeps it right in front of her eyes. But after a while, lightning strikes, the dish goes out, and the remote stops working. She puts it down and is about to hit the TV when she notices, off-screen, an old man sitting on the sofa. As she looks there, the remote falls, floating in the air. Suddenly, the figure screams from behind. She gets extremely scared. At the same time, the TV turns on by itself. Janet screams loudly. In the morning, Lorraine wakes up and goes downstairs to see Ed painting with concentration. When she goes closer to look, she is startled. Ed says, "I had a dream today, but I can't remember anything." He says, "I saw someone like this person in the painting in my dream, and even after waking up, I can't get him out of my head. So I thought I'd do some painting. Maybe that will get him out of my head." Lorraine is quite worried about this. Lorraine says, "I had something to tell you. We can do programs on lecture demonology for now, but we won't get involved in any cases." Before Ed can say anything, Judy arrives there. But Lorraine says, "Judy, if you trust me, don't ask questions." Meanwhile, tonight, Janet is going to sleep with her hands tied with a rope. When Margaret asks her why, she says, "I'm sleeping with my hands tied, so I don't walk in my sleep at night." As she goes to sleep, someone suddenly floats her up to the ceiling in the middle of the night and throws her on the floor, waking her up. At the same time, someone knocks heavily on the door. She unties her hands and comes outside but sees no one. However, when her eyes fall on the sofa in the living room, she sees the sofa rocking by itself. Scared, she hurriedly comes to the room, locks the door, and props it up with a chair. She covers herself with a blanket and lies down with a flashlight. A little later, she sees the chair is right next to her, and the door is also open. The fear has increased so much that she can hear her own heartbeat. In the meantime, someone grabs the blanket and pulls it. Janet's scream wakes up Margaret. Margaret says to her with annoyance, "Oh, what happened? There's no one here. It's probably all in your head." As she says this, both beds in the room start shaking violently. Hearing her two daughters scream, Peggy wakes up. Janet and Margaret come and tell her, "Mom, there is someone upstairs. Believe me, I'm not lying. Look, he bit me." Peggy enters the room, somewhat serious, but sees no one. Instead, she finds the Ouija board under the bed. She assumes the children were playing with these things and scaring each other. She expresses a lot of anger at the children about this and says, "That's enough drama." As soon as she says this, the dressing table next to her moves on its own, leaving Peggy speechless. She had never seen anything like this before. Overnight, they leave the house and go to their neighbor Peggy and Vic's house. Peggy tells her friend the complete story. Peggy's husband, Vic, calls the police, and they enter the house with him. They do a general interrogation and look around the house to see if anyone is inside. However, no one is found in the whole house. But suddenly, they hear the sound of furniture moving from the upper floor and go there. The sound is constantly increasing. At first, they assume it's a large rat or a ferret. However, their assumption is shattered when a chair moves on its own right in front of everyone's eyes. They all immediately leave the house. Confronted by all these events, the police say, "At most, we can file a case, but helping with this is basically beyond our means. If witnesses are needed, we can provide them, no problem." However, the female police officer takes Peggy aside and says, "I have a very good relationship with a priest. I can introduce you to them. Only the church can help you." Several days pass like this. One day, Lorraine was reading the Bible at home. Her daughter, Judy, was sitting next to her. Suddenly, she felt someone walk past behind her. She gets up to check, and Lorraine also goes outside. Judy tells her, "Mom, look who is standing in front of you. Who is this?" Lorraine looks ahead and sees the demon nun standing there. It turns its face away from them and walks away. Sending Judy away, she follows it and reaches another room. The room is empty. Behind her is Ed's painting. As soon as she turns on the light, the painting's face changes. High-pitched music starts playing from a real tape recorder behind her. As soon as she turns it off, the light goes off again. When she tries to get out of the room in fear, all the doors and windows close by themselves. A shadow emerges from behind the painting and begins to take its form. As it chases Lorraine, she miraculously goes to the basement of the house in Amityville. Lorraine asks it, irritated, "Who are you?" Valak roars at her, and Lorraine asks again, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" Valak signals with its hand and shows her that vision again. This time, it is clearly visible that Ed is standing there, and a tree has grown out of his chest. Lorraine is scratching away at the Bible in reality. Her daughter eventually brings her back to reality from the vision, and she notices that she has ruined the pages of the Bible. However, she understands that this was a threat from the entity. If they get involved in these things, it will kill her husband. Meanwhile, a journalist named Kent Allen comes to London to meet Peggy. He says, "Our news channel wants to do a report on the paranormal events that happened to you." Initially, Peggy directly refuses, saying, "Are the incidents that happened to us a source of entertainment for you? Leave us alone." But the journalist says, "Look, if you do the show, your case will come into special discussion. This might help you." After thinking for a long time, Peggy cooperates with him, and then the documentary about this house begins. The police officers who witnessed the events are also interviewed there. A physical researcher named Maurice Gross expresses interest in this incident. However, doctors from other countries also give their opinion on this incident, saying that it can sometimes be a mental problem. Finally, 11-year-old Janet's statement is taken. There, Janet is asked about her feelings about living in this haunted house. Janet says, "She is very angry now at your presence." The interviewer says that if she is present here, we want to talk to her. The interviewer repeatedly says, "Is anyone here? Who wants to talk to us? Answer our call." Janet starts feeling some discomfort inside. A little later, everyone realizes that something is wrong with Janet. The surrounding environment darkens. The light flickers. Janet groans. She says in the voice of an elderly man, "Janet is not here. She is sleeping." The interviewer asks, "What should I call you?" There is no answer, but she is making strange noises. When asked for her name, Janet asks a counter-question, "What is your name?" He says, "My name is Maurice Gross." "What is your name?" After a while, she says, "This is my house. Get out of here." However, after a long time, she says, "My name is Bill Wilkins, and I am 72 years old." Maurice asks, "Where did you come from?" The entity inside Janet says, "I came from the grave." When asked the cause of death, she says, "I went blind, then a brain hemorrhage. I fell asleep, then I died on that sofa in front." He asks why she came here. She says, "Because I like to hear their screams and cries." Saying this, she lets out an ugly laugh. A little later, the entity leaves her. Janet goes to her room in fear. This incident was later printed in magazines and caused widespread criticism of the Hodgson family, and this incident is also known as Amityville of England. Peggy used to take her children and stay at her neighbor's house every night. One night, Billy wakes up hearing the neighbor's dog's bell ringing, and he opens the door for the dog. However, it turns out that the dog transforms into the Crooked Man, like Billy's toy. In fear, he screams and tells his mother that the Crooked Man chased him. However, they see that it is Janet, who is singing like the Crooked Man with a changed voice. Janet is basically possessed. With her scream, all the bulbs in the house shatter, and Janet immediately faints and vomits there. Father Gordon has come from the church to talk to Ed and Lorraine about Janet's case, aka the Enfield Poltergeist case. They are played a recorded audio of Janet's voice. However, after listening to the complete audio, Ed says, "This is an elderly man's voice." However, when he learns that this voice belongs to a child only 11 years old, they are a little surprised. Lorraine asks, "What if this whole case is a fabricated story?" Gordon says, "We at the church do not want to get involved in this case right now. If this incident turns out to be a rumor, people will lose faith in the church. Besides, the way this case is being highlighted in the media, it is being compared to Amityville. So I want you to go to London, stay for a few days, and investigate. If it's a fraud, come back. If it's true, then a family is seeking our help." After the father leaves, Ed talks to her about the matter. Lorraine absolutely does not want to get involved here, because the figure Ed painted that day is the one she had seen several times before. 7 years ago in Morris's vision, a year ago in that Ocean Avenue house in Amityville. And this time it even threatened me. "If I get involved in these things, it will kill you." Ed ignores all this and explains to her, "I won't die. You are there to save me." He insists on Lorraine going and agrees to go, setting off for London. Maurice Grosse joins them on their journey, and after a long journey, they arrive at the Hodgson house. There, they meet the neighbor Vic, Peggy, and the children. Peggy takes them to Janet's room on the upper floor, which is locked, because most of the problems in the house happen only in this room. Ed says, "I heard Janet floats in the air." Maurice tells him, "Yes, we also have photographs." However, upon entering the room, they see that the entire room is covered with holy crosses. Peggy says, "Our neighbors gave us these crosses. Even after hanging these, we can't sleep peacefully at night. Sounds come from this room all night long." Lorraine goes to meet Janet and tells her, "We have come to help you. I have heard the complete story from your mother." Lorraine comforts her, saying, "Sometimes things happen to us that we can't share with anyone. But tell me, if something strange happens and you don't talk about it openly, can it be solved? You can tell me what your problem is." Janet says, "How do you know who to trust?" Lorraine says, "I have been betrayed many times after trusting others. There have been situations where no one understood me. But in the end, I found someone to trust." Janet asks, "So what did you do after finding him?" Lorraine says, "I married him." Janet now starts saying, "I can't sleep here. I'm very tired. I could sleep a little at school. But now I can't even go there because everyone is afraid of me. I have no friends. I can't go anywhere." Lorraine says, "That evil force wants you to be in fear like this, because they draw strength from fear." When Ed asks about that sofa, Peggy says, "Every night, Janet comes and sits on this sofa while she's asleep, and Bill Wilkins died right on this sofa. Actually, my ex-husband, the children's father, bought this house with the furniture." On the other hand, Lorraine asks Janet, "Is this elderly man's voice coming from your own mouth, or is it something else?" Janet mysteriously replies, "I don't speak. I am a medium." Lorraine says, "So, does that entity tell you anything?" Janet mysteriously says, "He wants to harm you." And she just said this. Ed decides to cleverly test the entity inside Janet. He will hold water in his mouth and then contact the entity inside Janet. When he asks the entity to appear, he gets no response at first. Janet says, "You stand with your backs turned. Then he will speak." When they agree to her suggestion, The lights in the house start flickering a little later, and the old man appears inside Janet. Ed asks, "Why are you bothering this family?" He says, "Am I the devil? Am I bothering anyone?" Ed says, "Yes, you are, and I have come to stop this. Do you know me?" Bill says, "Yes, your name. Your father used to call you Edward." Ed is somewhat surprised, but ignoring his words, he directly asks, "What is your purpose? Why are you not leaving this family alone?" Bill Wilkins repeats the same thing. This is his house. He came here to see his family. Ed asks, "Your family is not here. I don't know their address. Besides, why aren't you leaving? Go to heaven and be free." However, Bill says, "I don't believe in God, so there is no place for me in heaven." Ed says, "None of this matters to me, whether you are an atheist or a believer. Do you know this?" As he holds the Holy Cross locket in front of him, he writhes in agony. At one point, he leaves. However, it is seen that Janet had water in her mouth the whole time. That night, Ed talks to Lorraine about this matter. But Lorraine says, "I did not notice the presence of any evil force. I want to believe their words, but I don't know why I can't feel it." Before going to sleep at night, Janet ties her hands as usual. However, when Janet wakes up in the middle of the night, she sees herself on the ceiling. She is floating in the air. Bill Wilkins is sitting on the sofa in front of her. He walks to the top and, through supernatural power, brings Janet to her own room, the one that was locked. Slowly, all the crosses inside the room start turning upside down. Along with this, the spirit of Bill Wilkins haunts her. When Peggy hears the scream and goes upstairs, she sees the figure through the crack in the door. Ed and Lorraine arrive, somehow open the door, and enter, seeing Janet hanging by the curtains around her neck. Lorraine sees everything fine in the room, but one cross was slightly moved. The next day, Ed and Lorraine meet Maurice Gross. There, Maurice shows them the photo of the bite mark on Janet's neck. Maurice claims it is Bill Wilkins's work because the teeth look like those of an elderly person. Besides, we found out that the former owner of this house's father was named Bill Wilkins, and he died of a brain hemorrhage. Everything Janet said is true. The journalist standing next to him says, "I agree it's all false, but these photographs are not false," which they took. The female journalist says, "Maybe this is a drama created by their family, because a few months ago, a family claimed that paranormal events were happening to them. Their house was haunted." Saying this, they appealed to the government for a house. Maybe they are doing the same thing. Peggy Hodgson has already applied for a house. But Ed says, "No, we believe this family is truly in danger. However, they won't get help from the church until they can prove it." Maurice says, "Okay, I'll arrange some microphones and cameras. In the meantime, you spend some time with them." Ed spends many beautiful moments with the children. They sing together. And on the other hand, the investigators come and set up cameras and microphones all over the house. At night, Ed was doing some odd jobs around the house, and Lorraine is talking to Maurice outside. Maurice says, "If this case is proven, it will be written in history." Lorraine says, "Are you doing all this to witness history? This family really needs help." But Maurice says, "There are some things that researchers like me cannot prove in the laboratory. For example, a few years ago, my daughter died in an accident. But sometimes I see her. I feel that there is an existence of something supernatural in this world. But we can't see it. I am helping this family to prove it." Peggy asks Ed to fix their washing machine, so he goes to the basement. However, after fixing the washing machine there, he notices a slight leak in the water pipe. As he goes to fix it, Peggy sees someone behind him. When she asks Ed to look back, he sees no one there. But Bill's spirit grabs Peggy and bites her hand. Ed sees artificial teeth from under the water, but it does not match the wound in any way. Janet and her siblings are decorating the Christmas tree. Janet is looking towards the kitchen room. When Margaret asks her why, Janet says, "Didn't you see him? He's playing with a knife in the kitchen." Johnny says, "I'm going to the kitchen room. Don't you remember what Mr. Warren said? This is our house, and that entity shouldn't be allowed to bully us." As he enters, Janet is no longer between them. She is also in the kitchen with Johnny. With one scream from Janet, the whole room collapses. They break the door and enter, finding Johnny. However, they see a spoon lying in the room, which is bent. But Janet is nowhere to be found. After a lot of searching, they find Janet inside the cupboard. She is screaming in a deep voice. She is rescued from there. However, a little later, the female journalist comes and tells them that Janet was acting all this time. I have proof. The camera caught Janet lying completely. Instead, she was breaking everything herself in the kitchen room and bent the spoon with her own hands. They have some arguments with Peggy about this. Janet is crying, but Peggy tells them all to leave from there, and thus they have to leave. But before leaving, the neighbor Vic and Maurice Gross also try to convince Ed and Lorraine. After seeing so much, why are you leaving like this? Ed says, we didn't say we don't believe it, but Lorraine did not sense any presence, and most importantly, we have the evidence of Janet's fabricated scenes. What will the church do if they see this? Lorraine and Ed set off for home. Janet's siblings come and ask her about this. Did you really act? But why? Janet says, because that spirit threatened me that it would kill you. Ed and Lorraine are on the train. But Ed asks, why did Janet act in the room where the video camera was? She knew the camera was fitted in the kitchen. When the recorder tape falls down as he packs his bag, Ed sits down to listen to it again. However, as he plays the recorder tape, he hears the first voice saying, save him, let him go. The second tape says, it's not me, it's not me. But when both tapes are played together, they hear different words. Bill Wilkins says, save me, he's not letting me go. Along with this, Lorraine has a vision for the first time. Lorraine meets Bill Wilkins. Bill says, I came to see my family, but now they are not here. I think I should go now. But I can't go because an evil spirit has possessed her. Here Bill is talking about Janet. Bill is not an evil spirit. Instead, he has been protecting Janet all this time. Conversely, the evil spirit is using Bill. When Lorraine asks him the way to defeat that evil spirit, he gives her a riddle, which, translated into English, is somewhat like this. I am given and I am taken. I was with you when you were born. You didn't want me, but I was with you until you died. Before Lorraine could understand anything, Valak roars at her. Lorraine wakes up. Her nose is bleeding. She tells Ed, that old man's spirit is just a pawn. The real devil is someone else. That entity has been deceiving us all this time using Bill Wilkins' spirit. And that entity has taken a form that offends my religious feelings so that I become weak. The two of them set off to go there again. Meanwhile, Peggy hears Margaret screaming in the house and sees Janet in a possessed state. She is floating Margaret in the air. There is an ugly laugh on her face. She throws Margaret violently there. When Peggy goes to leave the children at the neighbor Vic's house, the house door closes on its own. On the other hand, Lorraine and Ed tell Vic the whole story. That there is an existence of more than one entity in that house, not just one. The elderly person could not contact us as long as we were in that house. And that crooked man, he is also an evil force. However, Lorraine knows the riddle Bill told her. After thinking a lot, Ed realizes he was talking about a name, because a name stays with something from birth until death. And by calling this name, they can send the real demon to hell. But Lorraine can't remember the name. So why did Bill tell her about the name? They go to Peggy's house even in this rain. The gate is locked from the outside. As Ed breaks the window and tries to enter, some unknown force throws the sofa at him. He is injured in this. All ways to enter the house are closed. The last resort is the house basement. As Ed enters, the door closes on its own. But Lorraine can't enter. She tells Ed not to go inside. She tells him to stay here until the door is broken. Remembering Lorraine's vision, she says, I didn't want to lose you. However, despite Ed's thousands of pleas, she leaves to help. Ed somehow breaks the kitchen floor and goes upstairs, but the gas pipe leaks and gas gets into his eyes. He can't see anything. Meanwhile, Vic comes with an axe and tries to break the door. Suddenly, Music starts playing inside the house. As he reaches the living room, he hears the sound of heavy breathing around him. He immediately uses the cross around his neck to threaten it. Lorraine is trying her best to remember the name of that entity, because if she didn't know its name, Bill would not have given her this riddle. So she screams, trying to remember its name. At one point, she remembers its name. She had written it in her Bible one day. She takes out the Bible from the car's trunk and finds its name from the torn pages. Its name is Valak. As soon as Lorraine is about to head towards Ed from there, lightning strikes the tree near the house window, and the tree breaks, becoming like the tree seen in the vision, which indicates that Ed will die by falling onto this tree from the window. Lorraine is almost crazy with worry. Ed reaches the second floor, where he sees the crooked toy spinning. As he peeks inside the tent, he sees the crooked man. He starts chasing him. Meanwhile, before the gate is fully broken, Lorraine enters the house. Ed reaches Janet's room, where he sees Janet standing by the window. As the glass breaks instantly, Janet tries to jump from there, but Ed catches her. Lorraine arrives there, and as she goes to save Ed, Valak appears there. The curtain Ed is holding is slowly tearing. Lorraine addresses Valak, saying, "I know your name, and I can control you, and I know your name." As soon as she says this, Valak roars. Lorraine calls Valak by name and commands it in the name of God to go back to hell. Valak writhes in agony. At one point, Valak's real form is seen there for a moment, and then it is defeated. In the last moment, she holds Ed and saves them. And the next morning, before leaving from there, Ed gives Janet his precious protective amulet and tells her, "When you grow up and someone is in trouble, give this to them and keep it with you until then." Thus, the rest of their lives pass, and they begin to live in that house without any problems. Along with this, Ed and Lorraine preserve that cursed crooked toy in their museum. Thus, many years pass. The year is 2003. In her later years, Janet's mother Peggy dies sitting on the same sofa where Bill Wilkins died 40 years earlier. So here ends the movie The Conjuring 2. Be sure to let us know how you liked it in the comments. And if you liked the video, don't forget to like it. If you are new to the channel, subscribe and set the bell icon next to it to all. Till then, see you in the next video. Goodbye.